The summer light over Rome carries a strange kind of warmth, ancient, golden, almost theatrical. For most tourists, it feels like a blessing. For 19-year-old Beau Solomon, it was the beginning of a new chapter. The American teenager from Wisconsin had fought cancer, rebuilt his life, and now stood on the edge of an adventure most people only dream about, a semester studying abroad in one of the oldest cities on Earth. It was June 30th, 2016. Beau had landed just 2 days earlier. His parents, Tom and Jody, remembered him calling home that night, tired but thrilled. He'd made friends, settled into his dorm at John Cabot University, and had plans to explore the neighborhood with classmates. In his own words, he felt like the luckiest guy alive. That night, Beau and several other American students ventured into Trastevere, one of Rome's liveliest districts. Cobblestone streets, old brick facades covered in vines, music spilling out from the bars, it was a postcard come to life. The group moved from one bar to another, laughing, drinking, trying to capture the rhythm of the city. Beau wasn't a heavy drinker, but friends later recalled he seemed relaxed, confident, completely at ease. At around 1 a.m., the group ended up at Sloppy Sam's, a well-known student bar near the river. It was loud, crowded, and filled with a mix of locals and tourists. CCTV footage from inside the bar later confirmed Beau was there, wearing a blue shirt, standing near the counter with friends. At some point, he became separated from the group. By 1:30 a.m., Beau was seen leaving the bar alone. Witnesses recall him walking toward the riverfront, the Tiber, whose dark waters cut silently through the heart of the city. That was the last confirmed sighting of him alive. When his friends returned to campus later that night, they assumed Beau had gone ahead or met someone else. It wasn't until the next morning, when he didn't show up for orientation, that concern began to spread. His roommate tried calling. No answer. Messages went unread. His phone was silent. By noon on July 1st, staff at John Cabot University reported him missing to the Italian authorities. What began as a routine inquiry quickly escalated when police discovered that Beau's wallet, phone, and credit cards were gone. And within hours, one of those cards was being used hundreds of miles away, in Milan. Someone was making fraudulent purchases. The case suddenly shifted from a simple disappearance to a potential robbery and abduction. Investigators began pulling CCTV footage from the Trastevere area, searching for clues. But Rome's narrow, winding streets and patchy camera coverage made tracing his final steps nearly impossible. Meanwhile, Beau's family back in Wisconsin was frantic. His parents were told only that he was missing. They spent hours calling embassies, police, and anyone who would answer the phone. He would never just vanish, his father said later. He's not that kind of kid. By the time the Solomons boarded a plane to Italy, local police had already begun combing the riverbanks near the bar where Beau was last seen. Divers searched beneath bridges, while officers canvassed bars, taxi drivers, and street vendors. No one had seen what happened after he walked away from the bar. As the hours turned into days, hope began to fade. The American embassy got involved, pressuring Italian officials to intensify the search. Flyers went up across Trastevere, bearing Beau's photo and a plea for information. Locals whispered theories. Maybe he'd been mugged, maybe he'd fallen, maybe he'd met someone and wandered off. But the truth was darker, quieter, and waiting downstream. On the morning of July 4th, 4 days after Beau disappeared, a tourist walking along the Garibaldi Bridge noticed something floating in the water below. At first, they thought it was debris, a dark shape tangled in reeds. But when authorities arrived, they realized it was a body. Within hours, police confirmed what everyone feared. It was Beau Solomon. The 19-year-old who had beaten cancer, who'd just arrived in Rome for the experience of a lifetime, had been found dead in the same river that had watched empires rise and fall. His discovery raised more questions than it answered. His wallet and phone were still missing. His credit cards were still being used. And when investigators examined his body, they found something that changed everything. A wound to his head, deep and severe, suggesting a struggle before he went into the water. In that moment, what began as a missing person case became a murder investigation. As news spread through Rome and across the Atlantic, the story of Beau Solomon, the American student found dead in the Tiber, began making headlines around the world. His classmates were shaken, his professors were devastated, his family was shattered. But behind the scenes, Italian investigators were already focusing on one man, someone who lived near the river, someone who might have seen what happened that night. They didn't know it yet, but the story that started as a college adventure was about to unravel into something far stranger, a confrontation beneath the bridge, a witness with shifting stories, and a river that refused to stay silent. In a city of saints and ruins, truth is never buried for long, but in Rome, even the river keeps its secrets. When midnight fell over Rome, the city hummed with its usual chaos, laughter from narrow alleyways, the rumble of scooters, the flicker of neon lights bouncing off cobblestones slick from spilled drinks and rain. Beau Solomon, dressed in a light blue shirt and dark jeans, stood among friends in the Trastevere district, a lively maze of bars and pizzerias popular among students and tourists. It was his first night in Italy, a celebration of arrival before his summer study program at John Cabot University began. Witnesses would later recall that Beau seemed in good spirits. He was the kind of person whose energy drew people in, tall, blonde, athletic, quick with a joke. Around 1 a.m., he was seen chatting animatedly outside a bar called Sloppy Sam's, a favorite among American students. Then, as the night thinned and the crowds began to scatter, Beau seemed to drift out of sight. What happened next remains one of the most chilling gaps in the timeline. His friends assumed he had simply gone back to their accommodation, a hotel just a few streets away. But when morning came and Beau didn't show up for breakfast, concern turned quickly into panic. Calls to his phone went straight to voicemail. Messages were left unread. By late morning, his friends contacted the police and the US Embassy. The first signs of foul play emerged within hours. Investigators discovered that Beau's credit card had been used repeatedly across Rome in the early hours after his disappearance. Thousands of euros spent on taxi rides, alcohol, and designer goods. Whoever had his card was moving fast and carelessly. Surveillance footage from one ATM showed a man with a dark beard attempting to withdraw cash using Beau's card. He wasn't Beau. This discovery changed everything. What had initially been treated as a case of a missing tourist, perhaps lost, drunk, or disoriented, now looked like a possible robbery and abduction. Detectives retraced Beau's steps, beginning at Sloppy Sam's. Bartenders remembered him. They confirmed he'd been drinking but wasn't visibly intoxicated. Around 1:30 a.m., witnesses claimed they saw him leaving the area, heading toward the Tiber River, the same direction his body would later be found. By that point, Beau's disappearance had made headlines in both Italy and the United States. His family, devastated, flew into Rome within 48 hours of the news. They described him as disciplined, intelligent and deeply caring, a cancer survivor who had fought hard to live and now dreamed of becoming a sports journalist. His brother Jake told reporters he didn't survive cancer to die like this. The search intensified. Police combed the banks of the Tiber using drones, divers, and rescue boats. The river, calm on the surface but treacherous below, had already claimed many lives. But for Beau's parents, there was still hope. Maybe he had been assaulted and left unconscious somewhere. Maybe he was alive. Then on July 4th, 2016, just 3 days after he was last seen, a grim discovery ended the search. A passerby spotted a body floating near a bridge called Ponte Marconi, roughly 3 miles downstream from where Beau had last been seen. The current had carried him far. When police retrieved the body, it was clear from the bruising and head wounds that Beau hadn't fallen accidentally. His injuries suggested a violent struggle, and his pockets were empty. The news broke before his family could be properly notified. His mother, Jody, fainted upon hearing it from a reporter outside their hotel. For a family that had already watched their son fight for life once, the cruelty of losing him this way felt unbearable. Investigators immediately treated the death as suspicious. They began piecing together a timeline, and one name surfaced almost immediately: Massimo Galeotto, a 40-year-old homeless man known to frequent the riverbank near Trastevere. Witnesses told police they had seen Galeotto arguing with a young man matching Beau's description near the Tiber that night. One even claimed to have heard a splash, followed by shouting. Galeotto, when questioned, denied involvement, but inconsistencies in his story caught attention. He admitted to seeing Beau, but said the American had been drunk and aggressive. As police interrogated Galeotto, the forensic team examined the body. There were no defensive wounds, suggesting Beau may have been pushed unexpectedly. Toxicology tests showed no extreme intoxication, contradicting Galeotto's claim. The conclusion was beginning to take shape. Beau Solomon hadn't simply drowned, he had been attacked and left to die. Still, one question haunted everyone. Why? Was it a robbery gone wrong? A random act of violence? Or something more sinister connected to the stolen credit cards and multiple transactions? Detectives pursued both paths simultaneously. On one end, they traced the ATM footage and discovered that the same bearded man seen using Beau's card had ties to petty crime groups in Rome. On the other hand, they built a psychological profile of Galeotto, a man known to drink heavily and pick fights near the river. As evidence mounted, so did public outrage. American students, terrified and angry, held vigils at John Cabot University. Locals demanded more safety patrols around the Tiber, an area long criticized for poor lighting and crime at night. The Italian press dubbed Beau il ragazzo americano del Tevere, the American boy of the Tiber. By the end of that week, Galeotto was charged with Beau's murder. But even then, few realized how messy the investigation and the truth would eventually become. Because soon after his arrest, witnesses began to recant. Footage went missing. And the case that had seemed clear-cut began to unravel into something far more uncertain and far more tragic than anyone had imagined. When the name Massimo Galeotto first appeared in headlines, the public thought the story had reached its conclusion. A suspect had been caught. Justice was on its way. But behind the confident police briefings and TV soundbites, the truth was far from settled. The case against Galeotto, a 40-year-old drifter who lived in a tent beneath a bridge on the Tiber, was fragile from the start. Detectives believed they had their man. He'd been seen arguing with Beau near the river that night. He was intoxicated. He had a history of violence. And crucially, he lived just meters from where Beau's body was found. But as the days passed, inconsistencies began to crack through the foundation of the story. When questioned, Galeotto admitted to meeting Beau, but his version painted a different picture. He said Beau had stumbled toward the riverbank drunk, bumping into people and yelling incoherently. Galeotto claimed he tried to calm him down, that the two exchanged words, and then Beau lost balance and fell into the river. No struggle, no push, just an accident. At first, the police dismissed that version, but as forensic details trickled in, the certainty started to fade. Beau's body showed bruising consistent with a fall, yes, but not the deep contusions or fractures that would prove a violent fight. And the toxicology report revealed alcohol in his system, though not enough to make him lose coordination entirely. It was a mystery in fragments. Then came the problem of the stolen credit card. The man seen using it wasn't Galeotto, nor anyone in his circle. The footage from ATMs across Rome showed a completely different suspect, a clean-shaven man in a dark jacket who seemed to have acquired Beau's belongings after his death. That discovery ripped a hole in the robbery motive, suggesting either multiple people were involved or that Galeotto had nothing to do with the theft at all. Still, the prosecution pushed forward. The optics were simple. A foreign student dead in a foreign city, a local vagrant as the last known person to see him alive. It was a narrative that made sense, and that made headlines. By late 2016, the trial began in a Rome courtroom packed with journalists and grieving family members. Beau's parents sat in silence as prosecutors argued that Galeotto had attacked Beau in a drunken rage and pushed him into the Tiber, leaving him to drown. They showed maps, photos of the riverbank, and witness statements from people living under the bridge who had heard shouting that night. But the defense team was prepared. They pointed out the holes in the police timeline, how long it took divers to recover the body, how key footage from nearby security cameras had been corrupted, how witnesses who initially spoke confidently later admitted they weren't sure what they saw in the dark. One woman even testified that she'd heard two men arguing, but couldn't tell if either was Beau. Then came the defense's most explosive claim, that Galeotto himself had called for help after Beau fell. The defense produced a witness, another homeless man, who said he saw Galeotto shouting toward the river, asking someone to help the boy who fell. Police never verified that claim, but it was enough to introduce doubt. And in a murder trial, doubt changes everything. As weeks passed, the prosecution's case began to weaken. No DNA from Beau was found on Galeotto's clothing or possessions. No fingerprints, no conclusive physical evidence linking the two beyond the brief argument witnesses described. Even the medical examiner hesitated under cross-examination, admitting that while Beau's injuries could suggest a struggle, they were also consistent with a fall caused by a misstep near the edge of the riverbank. By the final week of the trial, the momentum had shifted. What began as a story of a violent killing was now being reframed as a tragic accident, one that may have been worsened by police assumptions, media pressure, and a rush to find closure. In July 2017, almost exactly 1 year after Beau's death, the court delivered its verdict. Massimo Galeotto was acquitted of murder. He was a free man. The news sent shockwaves through both Italy and the United States. The Solomon family, heartbroken, called the verdict unthinkable. To them, the idea that Beau, a disciplined athlete and cancer survivor, simply slipped and drowned on his first night in Rome was impossible to accept. "We didn't come all this way for a question mark," his father said outside the courthouse. "We came for justice." But justice in this case had dissolved into uncertainty. Even among investigators, the verdict left a bitter taste. Some believed Galeotto was guilty, but cleverly shielded by a lack of forensic proof. Others quietly admitted the evidence was too thin from the start, that the police had pinned everything on the wrong man. What happened next only deepened the confusion. In 2020, 4 years after Beau's death and 3 years after Galeotto's acquittal, the same man was arrested again, this time accused of killing his girlfriend, another homeless woman who lived with him by the Tiber. The pattern was disturbingly similar: a night of drinking, a violent argument, and a body found in the river. For Beau's family, the news was shattering. It reignited the pain they'd tried to bury. If Galeotto had indeed killed again, what did that mean about the first time? Had Beau's death been a warning sign ignored? Or was it just a haunting coincidence in a city that seemed to swallow truth along with its secrets? To this day, the official record of Beau Solomon's death reads simply, drowning. But the question of how he drowned and who might have caused it remains unanswered. In the end, Rome moved on. The tourists returned, the river kept flowing, and the bridge where Beau's life ended became just another landmark. But for his family, and for those who followed the case, it remains a wound that never fully closed. A reminder that sometimes, even in the most beautiful cities, the truth can sink deeper than the river itself. By the time the court delivered its final verdict, Rome had already forgotten. The case that once dominated international headlines, American student found dead in the Tiber, faded into the background noise of the city. But for the Solomon family, there was no fading, no forgetting. They flew home to Wisconsin, carrying their son's ashes and 1,000 unanswered questions. Beau Solomon had been in Rome for less than 24 hours. 24 hours. And yet that short time had torn through 2 families, 2 countries, and a system that was supposed to find the truth. His parents tried to piece together what really happened. They spoke to investigators, to students from Beau's program, even to locals who'd been near the bridge that night. What they found was chaos, conflicting testimonies, missing footage, incomplete reports. The official story, that Beau had fallen, drunk, into the river, didn't align with the young man they knew. Beau had beaten cancer as a child. He was disciplined, cautious, and grounded. He wasn't the kind of student who lost control. But in Rome, that didn't seem to matter. The narrative of the drunk American abroad stuck quickly, and once it did, every inconsistency in the investigation seemed easier to ignore. The family hired a private investigator who uncovered something Italian police hadn't pursued aggressively enough: the stolen credit card trail. In the days after Beau's death, his card was used dozens of times, at bars, gas stations, and clothing stores across Rome. The man caught on security footage using it was clearly not Galeotto. He was clean-shaven, dressed neatly, and moved confidently, like someone who knew he wouldn't be stopped. But by the time the footage surfaced, it was too late. Galeotto had been acquitted. The case was closed. The Solomons pushed for the investigation to be reopened, but bureaucracy in two countries made that nearly impossible. Italian law had already rendered judgment. The US State Department offered condolences, but little else. Rome police said they had no new leads, and so the story drifted, unresolved, unfinished, just like Beau's body had once drifted down the Tiber. Back in Wisconsin, Ripon College held a memorial. Friends and professors remembered Beau as a bright, generous soul, the kind of person who turned every conversation into something meaningful. His younger brother read a eulogy that left the entire gymnasium silent. He survived cancer when doctors said he wouldn't. He fought for his life once, and he should have been given the chance to fight again. Months passed, then years. But the shadow of that night in Rome didn't leave the Solomon family. In 2020, news broke that stunned everyone who remembered the case. Massimo Galeotto, the man acquitted of Beau's murder, had been arrested again, this time for the death of his girlfriend, a woman named Alessia, whose body was found floating in the same river. According to witnesses, the two had been arguing by the water before she vanished. The parallels were impossible to ignore. Same man, same river, same story. Italian police, under immense scrutiny, reopened the case. Not Beau's, but Alessia's. They investigated more carefully this time, building a stronger file. But for Beau's parents, it wasn't vindication. It was heartbreak all over again. If Galeotto truly had a violent pattern, they believed their son's death wasn't an accident. It was the first act in a tragedy Rome never took seriously. Yet legally, nothing changed. Galeotto remained innocent in the eyes of the law for Beau's death. Meanwhile, the Tiber, calm and ancient, kept flowing, its waters swallowing evidence and memory alike. Locals still walk its bridges at night, unaware that beneath them lies the story of a boy who came to study history and became part of it. The deeper tragedy of Beau Solomon's case isn't just the unanswered questions, it's the pattern of silence it revealed. Rome, with its centuries of beauty and ruin, had seen countless deaths, countless mysteries. Tourists vanish, drunks fall into the river, crimes go unsolved. And the city keeps moving. But for a small town in Wisconsin, the world stopped on June 30th, 2016, and never really started again. In interviews, Beau's mother said something that stayed with many who followed the story. "People tell us to find peace," she said. "But how can you find peace when the person who took your child's life gets to breathe the same air, walk the same streets, and see the same river?" Years later, students from Ripon still mention Beau when they travel abroad. His story became a cautionary tale, not just about safety, but about how fragile justice can be when it crosses oceans. The image that remains is simple: a boy standing near a river at midnight, laughing, unaware of how close tragedy is. A camera catches the last frame before darkness, then nothing. For those who knew him, Beau's memory isn't tied to how he died, but how he lived. Surviving what should have ended him, inspiring everyone around him to keep going, to fight harder. But for those who tell his story, the final question lingers like a whisper in the current. Did Beau Solomon fall into the Tiber that night, or was he pushed? Some stories close, and some stories echo. This one echoes, through the halls of a college in Wisconsin, through a courtroom in Rome, and through the restless waters of the river that never spoke.